Hello, folks. Here's our next lecture. Now, remember, these lectures we're talking about things that will help you on the AP test. This one in particular, because some of the stuff that we're talking about actually goes backwards even before World War One. But this also will help you with all of you that are going to on to college, no matter what your major is. Well, I'm sure somehow this fits into you engineering students. But no matter what you're doing, your professors are going to want you to have a base knowledge of what happened going forwards from World War One. So, and it also, this is the world you live in. Okay, everything that was created basically after World War One and World War Two created the world you're in right now. So, and a lot of these things touch on a whole lot of different fields that I know many of you are actually interested in. So, this is called the Age of Anxiety, which is kind of ironic when you think about what's all going on around in the world we are today, and that we've got a lot of anxiety. Okay, but this is because they were on this verge of they didn't know what was coming next. All those systems that had been in place for years, the monarchies, the political, economic systems, the alliances, the balance of power that had been created by those congresses before, the nationalism, and even the religious ideas that people had come apart and started to fall apart even before World War One happened. So yeah, it does sound a lot like the world you're living in. So I guess we should just move on. So, okay. So, and again, this is what we're talking about is that the reason why it's called the Age of Anxiety is for the most part, the world was a pretty steady thing up to this point if you lived in Western Europe. For the French, yeah, that was a hot mess. Let's all embrace that. With the problems, obviously, with the whole republic, not a republic. Hey, let's get us another Napoleon kind of thing that was going on. And obviously, in Germany, with the formation of the new German state, it was not exactly the most stable thing in the universe. And of course, the Habsburgs and what was happening in Central Europe. So basically, me trying to tell you that this was a stable thing sounds pretty ridiculous. However, it really was a pretty stable thing in that the same economic systems, the industrial revolution, the cultural norms of class, that the upper class was the upper class and the lower class was the lower class. Those were pretty much a standard concept that people knew. Royals were royals, nobles were nobles, upper class or upper class. It's the Downton Abbey kind of effect, that the upper class was the upper class and the lower class was the lower class, and you knew your place in society. But World War One flips that on its head, that the old social economic systems have come apart, that you have this new thing called communism that's going to show up. Well, it wasn't new, but it's new in the fact that it actually has a country in it. That the old families like the Habsburgs, the Hohenzollerns, the Romanovs had either abdicated and now had formed republics, which was a whole new thing for the Central Europeans, like the Austrians and the Romanian or the Hungarians. But the Hohenzollerns, who had only been running all of Germany since 1871, now that comes apart. So this is that historical context. Like if you remember, one of the things they're going to look at is contextualization. How did we lead to this? Well, World War One creates the Age of Anxiety, but the Age of Anxiety was already starting. That you look at the Industrial Revolution and the class struggles that were happening, or the fact that the Industrial Revolution created the weapons that literally are going to upset that balance of power with the battleship conflicts that we saw with the building of battleships. That's that contextualization. So if you watch the AP things, the Geosprite, geographically, you had these dying empires. Socially, you had the coming apart of those social class issues. Okay, politically, you've wiped out these families that for a long time had ruled, and economically, you'd created these new things like totalitarianism. You created Stalinist Russia. You create fascism that's coming out of this. But those economic systems before, people always counted that the system was going to be okay, and then the Great Depression hits. So like we said, social classes are changing, which the Great Depression hits everybody, not just the lower class, but the upper class. So you can see how that whole Geosprite thing that's in the thing that the AP people are talking about for contextualization. What we talked about before
it looked like things were good, but in actuality, it wasn't as good as we all thought it was. And that there's kind of like an apple. This is what you talked about in U.S. history of the Gilded Age, that the outside of the apple looks really, really good, but the inside of the apple is rotten. Or the bird, why it's a gilded cage, is that the bird, yes, it's in a very beautiful cage. It's still just a cage. So that's the historical contextualization that we're looking at. Does that make sense, hopefully, for all of you? That everything we talked about before, yes, it was creating this stable, hey, look, I've got plenty of money and everything, and I know my social class in society. However, those same things like the balance of power had made it so wars are going to be even more vicious when it comes around. Yes, you created this economic growth through the Industrial Revolution, but you created a wealth disparity that's going to cause the Great Depression. Yes, you had these nobles and kings that were still in some of these places like the Romanovs and Russian Hohenzollerns, but that's going to create economic and social disparity that when those things come apart and you see the beginning of communism in Russia or the republics that are going to be extremely weak in Germany, those same social stabilities didn't allow for growth in for an equal share of the power. And so now these people are thrust into a new world. And so that's what we're talking about, the contextualization is all the stuff before the fall of France and the failures of its republics, England's overexpansion into its empire that didn't give enough wealth to the middle class. Those are all things leading to this age of anxiety, that those social systems that had been there for so long and created the world now are failing. And that's what causes this. Kind of how you kind of feel right now that, hey, look, everything's going to be okay. And then it's not. So it's okay. It's going to be okay. Okay. And of course, the icing on the cake is the Great Depression, which is a global economics failure. So like we said, World War I is a staggering blow to Western civilization. This is where you're going to see a lot of the shift. And then, like we said, the entire world was turned upside down. And also the fact that you felt like you're in a perpetual state of crisis, because for a long time, those Congress systems had maintained stability. You had powers like England that had economic wealth and were always growing economically. You've got Germany, who was expanding militarily. And now, because of the Treaty of Versailles, they're going from one breakdown to the next. They've lost their military power. They've lost their territory. Their economy has been destroyed. The Habsburgs went from a large empire in Austria to now there's no regional control. And now you've got these little micro dust-ups that are going to happen where there's nationalism and insecurity and economic and then in Russia you've got a civil war you went from a czar who at least there may not be trains and they may not be running on time if there were a train, but at least you knew who was in charge. And then the Russian Revolution that turns into a total war where entire villages are being wiped out. You've got England, who's going to be facing decolonization, which is the contextualization is obviously the imperial age that came right before this. So it's like they're running from one disaster to the next disaster to the next disaster to the next disaster. And that causes this anxiety. It's like your house is on fire, the tornado's coming you, and there's a global pandemic at the same time. That's what the people feel like. So, and oh, by the way, there had been a global pandemic before this, which the Spanish flu had caused insecurity as well. So you can see why. And this is going to be reflected. This attitude is going to be reflected in a lot of the literature, in the science. And we're going to see how some of these things are questioned throughout this. So the ideas of the church, which in political science and other things are going to be questioned as well. And economics are going to be questioned. So. Okay, so one of the things you can use as contextualization of why there's an age of anxiety, obviously, is this cartoon. This is Charles Darwin, which we've already talked about. You're going to see the education rate is going to go up extremely. And why that Darwinism comes in is because you see a questioning of the old systems. Okay, so as people become educated, they ask more questions, and asking more questions is what's going to cause instability. So the very thing that they created, public education, to help stabilize, create nationalism, and to use this to manipulate the populations we talked about in mass politics is now going to backfire on them because people start asking questions. And those questions are going to cause political instability. So, oops, we broke our Europe. And then, of course, this is the example of public education. Right now, you would all long for this. We mocked this when we were in class and we saw this picture, but now we so would love to be in this picture. So soon, hopefully soon. Okay. So there are a number of newspapers, magazines, that increase of education and even pornography. That's that questioning of the social morals and stability that's going to come out of this. So, and of course, there's an example we saw before of science fiction literature. A lot of the popular culture literature like Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Bram Stoker. These all come out of that later period and many of them come out in newspapers before. There's a high rate of literacy, and that high rate of literacy, is what's going to help cause the questioning, and the questioning causes the political instability. So literally the Industrial Revolution, that's your contextualization. Your Industrial Revolution is going to create the very political and social strife that you see now, because it creates education, which causes people to question, which then causes political and economic strife. Wow. Okay. So here's some philosophies. You're going to have Comte with the idea of positivism, that he basically says, like it says, the physical nature explained by divinity, abstract principles explained by operative agencies of nature, and explanations of nature become a matter of exact description of phenomena. This is the beginning of what we would call sociology, that by studying society and looking at how science and man work together for the creation of good, that's basically where we're going with the idea of sociology as a study of human society. So that's what's going to come out of positivism. And again, that studying of society causes people to ask questions about society, which then goes back and causes social, political, economic strife. Darwin, this one's going to cause, again, we're going to see Darwin's ideas of the descent of man is going to show up in Herbert Spencer's social Darwinism, which then contextualizes parts of the age of imperialism. And of course, Huxley is the guy who comes back and goes, whoa, Spencer, hold your train up here. Is that it's not just that we have survival of the fittest. He says that we have evolved to the point where there's human ethics, like we said in class. Chimpanzees hunt for sport. Okay. They enjoy killing at times. You people at times enjoy killing, but the thing that stops you from killing each other is the fact that you morally think it's wrong. So yes, you may be stronger than those weaker people, but at the same time, Huxley says, but ethically, you know what you're doing is wrong. And that's what does not justify your ideas of social Darwinism. So we already talked about the white man's burden. And so this idea, and this is where we're heading into, and we're going to discuss in the documents, is this questioning of the Bible. And there's another social. That's why you're going to see that pushback with the syllabus of errors that says, whoa, this new intellectual idea from the Pope. The Pope says this new intellectual idea is in questioning the positions of society and the idea of social structure and the position of the church, particularly the Catholic Church, is wrong, and that the Pope is infallible and basically the Bible is it. Now, Nietzsche, we will talk more about him when we discuss, but basically Nietzsche is going to say, we're going to discuss this on Wednesday, and I'll tap it into some other stuff. But Nietzsche is going to basically go into the idea that Christianity glorifies weakness. And that then questions the church, that he says that the idea that a supreme deity elevates individuals that shouldn't be elevated because all of a sudden I'm a chosen one of God, then that elevates these individuals and that don't need to be elevated or shouldn't be elevated because they don't have any talents and don't make them what he calls the Ubermen. And so therefore it's like an opiate of the masses that Lenin uses the term, that religion is a way of controlling the masses and trying to make the idea that everyone is equal. And Nietzsche says, no, everybody's not equal, which isn't a bad thing. is that some people are better at different things. If everybody was the same, then that'd be no point. Some people are going to be Ubermen in one area and not Ubermen in the other area. And so, but then religion creates this idea of everybody's equal and that we all then have to work together as one equal mass. And that's not what Nietzsche says, because then that holds back people that have specific talents. So you see how this questions that whole structure of the church and of religion, which then causes a whole against everything, against the societal norms. So, and again, notice it's this movement towards secularism, which again questions the ideas of the Catholic Church, which we've seen this in contextualization with the French Revolution. We saw it again in the French Revolutions of 1840s. We're going to see it with the Culture Kampf here and the Education Acts in England in 1902, the May Laws in 1873 in Germany, and that Culture Kampf we're going to see, the Ferry Laws, which came in France. So there's already a movement towards secularization. But the problem is with the secularization is a great idea as far as putting everybody on the same page educationally and promoting science and the idea that the state, that's where it's most important. Remember with Bismarck, the Culture Kampf, it's not a matter of promoting science and mathematics. And this is true in France too. This is about eliminating the Catholic Church as a power that then holds back the power of the state. So German unification, that is the driving force of the Culture Kampf, which is your contextualization. Then for France, the Ferry Laws, that's about removing the Catholic Church, which is a spokesperson, a person's against the Republic after Napoleonic, just like after the Napoleonic period in 1848, our next Napoleon, remember Napoleon III. But this is also going back to the whole French Revolution. The Catholic Church was one of the big spokespeople against the republics. And in England, it's an idea of promoting nationalism and as well as industrial power. And so they're pushed to create those things, to create nationalism or to create republicanism, liberalism and secularism in France, and Germany with nationalism, and Great Britain with nationalism and economic prosperity. That at the same time weakens one of those very fibers that then pulls it apart, much like we saw contextualization again with what happened in the Protestant Reformation. That when you introduce this new thing called Protestantism, it weakened the Catholic Church and then weakened one of the fibers of society, which then caused absolutism. Because either you could gain power by getting power from the people, like we saw in England, or you can get power from the church, which we saw with Henry VIII in England, or not in England, but or like you saw in politicus or with politiques like Henry Navarre. So, see, it all kind of melds together. Ooh, all right. And of course, there's our picture of the Culture Kampf, which should show up on the AP test, especially now since they changed the format. So, and then there are obviously going to be rivalries in Britain and Ireland and France. Ireland, obviously, and France are particularly Catholic. England, you're going to see a battle with the Anglicans. And then, of course, you're going to see these miracle cults start growing out of too, because there's a lot of mysticism that comes out of this period too. And that's the weird thing. Anytime you have an age of anxiety where people think that there's stability, but there's not, and they're very angsty, people tend to drift towards the weird and the magical. In American history, it'd be the 1950s, Roswell. There's that drift towards this idea that we're not alone because you're afraid to death that some communist is going to blow you off the planet. So we have this drift. That's why a lot of the science fiction movies in American history in the 1950s were around atomic weapons and around aliens coming to the planet, because that's what terrified us and created an age of anxiety. During this, when religion starts coming apart, you tend to drift towards mysticism. And that was going to be a major thing during this time period of, Houdini spends most of his time debunking it. Him and Doyle actually were friends. And Houdini spent a lot of time trying to debunk these mysticism ideas that show up. So, And then again, this is our pushback by the Catholic Church. And this is not much different than what you saw with the Council of Trent or the Catholic Church barely making any type of changes and pushing its doctrines. And yeah, we'll tweak the indulgences a bit. But this is what you're seeing. That syllabus of errors that comes out by Pius IX basically says that the church is infallible and that modernism is wrong, and this ideas of secularism and ideas of liberalism are going to be the downfall. Who originally had supported these liberal ideas, but realizing the impact on his political and social power is going to push back with the syllabus errors. And again, this is not much different than what you could see the Catholic Church do with the Council of Trent during the Protestant Reformation. So, and then obviously you're to see anytime there's a period like this, there also going to be a pushback because there's obviously in Europe, there is an influence of Muslim populations, and there's a pushback against because it's seen as an older and non-reforming idea. It also fits into the racism concept that we're going to see, and also with the falling apart of the Ottoman Empire. So, and there is a movement for reform. The Salafi movement does try to modernize, but we're going to see what happened when you get the Young Turks in the Ottoman Empire. It actually caused political and economic collapse. So, oops. So, scientifically, for those of you that are planning on going into the sciences, this is a big time for the sciences. I'm sorry that this is over what Heisenberg, but we're going to see the uncertainty principles. You're going to see this theory of relativity, quantum theory of energy with Planck. Now, I'm not going to go into the world of physics here with you because Lord knows you guys know more physics than I do. But here's the thing. These people are literally questioning the very fiber of time and space itself. And by doing that, they question and push the reality of God and society and man's place in those societies. That physics becomes the new truth, like it says here. That I can explain anything right down to the very atoms that the world is made of, and even time and space and energy. And they literally get to the point where you're questioning the very concepts of God itself, himself or herself. So that is why this physics is important. That Einstein, who never said he was an atheist anyway, is seen as a major attack on religion, right up there with Darwin. And then with radiation and x-rays, it goes from kind of a hobby thing where it's, hey, look, I can get radiation poisoning by x-raying my foot so I don't have to measure my shoe size, which they were doing that. They had boxes that took x-rays. You go in the shoe store and they took your picture of your foot and it gave you cancer in the process. But this idea of studying subatomic energy and particles and the fiber of space questions again the position of God and tears the fiber of society, much like the scientific revolution did that we saw before. Contextualization. This is Newton. Newton's ideas of gravity question the very concepts of political equality, question the very concepts of religion. That before an apple fell to the ground because God made the apple fall to the ground. If God didn't want it to fall to the ground, it wouldn't fall to the ground. All of a sudden, Newton comes around and goes, no, that's not how it works. That it falls to the ground because it's an apple and because gravity affects everything. That's kind of the same thing. This is Galileo. I'm not meaning to cause this problem, but I'm going to cause this problem. Or, like I said, Newton. All right. So there's where we're going with this. This is just as powerful as Newton's apple or Galileo's telescope in that because it questions the very concepts of religion without questioning, not attempting to. They just do it because of the very concepts of their science. And again, causes people insecurity, which then causes an age of anxiety. So, and there's Madame Curie, who died, by the way, of radiation poisoning. So she figured that part out. So realists and naturalists, this is the idea of the observation of work and portraying. Basically, they're looking at how society they want to look at the natural concept of society in individuals, and you see this pushback against that bourgeois life, and that what you're really seeing isn't exactly what it is. The Dickens is Oliver Twist, good example of this. George Eliot, which some of you've read, George Bernard Shaw and his plays basically show you it's the modern version of what we're talking about here with the realists and naturalists would be like Downton Abbey. These people look like they have this great society and this great position and they have all this wealth, but yet they're subject to the same failures that you are as a human being. And they don't they show you what's actually behind the curtain, if that makes sense. Modernism, again, critical of society. And we're going to see this with Thomas Mann, which you read some of that about how the masses are being manipulated. But they're more, like it says here in the slide, like you see right here, they're more concerned with the beauty than societal issues. So they're critical. They look at this as a way of exploring man's position in those classes, if that makes sense, and less of, hey, they're critical of the middle class, but more of like why more of like trying to explain this to you. It's a little difficult here. They're basically trying to look at how the individual fits into this. That would be in the part like we saw of the citizen in the one reading I gave you of Kafka fits into that idea. So they're so critical of society, but they're looking at the individual's position in the society. And sometimes the beauty of how we can overcome those social issues, and sometimes how the social issue will overcome us. One of the best examples of modernism is Keynesian economics, which I hope to God you all know Keynesian economics by now, because you're seeing it right now. It's where the government's priming the pump. Did you put deficit spending to encourage employment and production? And therefore, once you encourage it, it will then put money into the system, which then starts the system back up, because the money the government put in will then go into paychecks, which then produce the wealth that people need. So, yeah, you don't need to worry about me explaining this when you can see it, because your parents are going to get a check here soon from the government, which that is Keynesian economics at its finest right there. Or giving grants to businesses to keep people employed, or creating programs after it's over to put in fiber optics into rural areas because our internet sucks. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. So like I said, it's a lot more of the individual's position in society, like Kafka, like the thing we read. Okay. And then Impressionism, we've talked about that one already. The light colors, the art. This is the art part that we talked about. We talked about both of these, and we talked a bit about Cubism. We're going to see some examples of that here. This obviously is a piece of impressionist art, and then your pointillism piece, and this is Cubist. Okay, Nietzsche. We're going to spend a little bit more time talking about this in the discussion. So, but the reason he declares God's dead is because you created, his premise is that you created God because you needed a way to understand the world. But then after you got rid of God, you don't need him anymore, because now you have moved to a position where you don't need him because you then can control your own destiny. We'll talk more about that in the discussion. One of the biggest things to understand is Nietzsche is both something that can be a source of good. I know that sounds weird, and many of you are going to look at Nietzsche and go, oh my God, I hated him. Because either you love Nietzsche or you hate Nietzsche. All right? Nietzsche's got this is kind of existentialism, which he's part of, is either you love it or you hate it. And what he's basically saying, and I hope that I'm not giving away too much for the discussion or for your homework, Nietzsche is basically saying that if you have the capability, society should not hold you back. That you have the capability, you have the intellectual, economic, or power, you should be able to use that, but you should use it for not what is right for society, because as you use your ability, you will end up doing what is right because it's right for you, which then is right for everybody. It's the Superman approach. Superman doesn't have to go stop the speeding train. He stops the speeding train because he can stop the speeding train, not because it's the right thing to do, but because he can do it. But if society puts limits on those Ubermen and tries to make us all the same, by putting limitations and moral and things like that on the Uberman, which is the Superman, okay, he then is holding you back, or by telling you something is wrong because you have the power to do it, and then society says you can't do that because it's wrong morally, then you're holding that person back, which then in the end detriments all of us. So that's where Nietzsche is going with it. The problem is if you, it sounds like a great idea, but if you pervert it like the Nazis did, it comes off that because I'm the Uberman, I can do whatever the heck I want to do, that there's no limitations on me, which then allows me to go off and do these anti-Semitic and racist things, which is what Nietzsche says you're not supposed to do. Nietzsche says just because you can do it doesn't mean you can kick the Untermensch, the lower people, down, because I may be an Uberman when it comes to playing the piano, but I suck over here doing math. Well, the guy I look at over here, because I'm not big and strong and I can kick his butt, but he can do math. And so he's an Uberman when it comes to math, and I'm an Uberman when it comes to playing the piano and lifting weights. We're both good at what we do. We don't have to get on each other. We don't have to be anti-Semitic or racist. We just have to embrace that we're both good at other things. And then by allowing us to do our thing and not putting limitations on morals and created social systems, that we then can do whatever we can do. And by doing those things would be good for society. It's kind of a naturalist kind of concept to it, really, if you think about it, that you just do what you need to do and it'll be good for society. And society should stop creating these ideas we're all equal. So, but can you see how the Nazis would then kind of pervert that with the anti-Semitism we saw coming out with the Dreyfus affair in France, and then obviously now with the anti-Semitic ideas that are coming out of Germany because of World War I. So, yeah. And then Freud. Okay, folks, we're not going to go a whole bunch into Freud, but you have to understand how Freud could end up in a question. Is that there's a couple things that obviously we understand that many of you are taking AP Psych or taking Psych in general. Most of Freud's ideas that are based around sexual disorders or sexuality or anything like that is just, wow, did he go way out in left field. But his idea that individuals have some type of mental issue that can, through psychoanalysis, can be understood and possibly aid the person in overcoming those issues, that's actually kind of a, it's the thing. And the fact that you're going to move, that at the beginning of the 19th century, you were still practicing the idea that people were possessed, and people that were mentally ill were treated like creatures in sideshows, or were locked away or chained to walls and hit with hoses, or hid by families, or deemed as social deviants and thrown in prisons. Now, granted, we still do that to a degree, but by the time you get into the 20th century, we're actually going, wait a minute, these people aren't broken. They just have something that's wrong with them mentally that we can try to understand. And so, and Carl Jung, that is the idea that when collective memories are what basically creates your experience, constitutes human soul. And there's Freud and Jung and all of them. Max Weber, you're going to see this, the collective behavior concept, that society basically, or collective shared ideas of society. It's kind of the bureaucratic approach that basically
it's kind of why you guys are just a mess right now, is you're used to following in a bureaucratic system where bells denote what your time of your day is, and those social structures then create the concept of society. And without the social structure of society you don't have right now, it's kind of a pain in the butt. And so that's this idea of the rationalism that you're going to see with collective behavior with Weber. And then we already talked about this, that the idea of racism, you're going to see a real insurgence of racism because when people, excuse me, when people are hurting economically, socially, politically, because of the Great Depression, the failures of World War I, the collapsing of the political, religious systems, and all that comes into question, they want to glom onto something that's easy for them to understand. We saw this contextualization. We saw this with what happened with the Reconquista, with Jews in Spain in the 1400s. We saw this during Black Death with the flagellants and the persecution of Jews. We saw this with the Dreyfus affair, that obviously it must have been a Jew because it couldn't have been a good Frenchman who did this. This is what you're seeing, is that Goldenauer, this idea that other races are inferior, it also then justifies your imperialism, just like we justified colonialism back in the 1700s and the 1600s. Chamberlain is going to basically say that there's genetic superiority, which of course we know where both these are going to lead, that this is going to lead to the Holocaust, which is coming in the 1930s and 40s. So anytime you have a time of political, economic instability, people are going to drift towards racism. It makes them feel better about themselves. If I'm better than those people, my life sucks, but at least I'm not them. That's the approach that these people are going to go with. And that's what's going to lead to what happens at Auschwitz, Buchenwald, and Dachau. And of course, the counter to that is the Zionism, which is going to come with Herzl and this push that Jews need their own homeland, that they can protect themselves. Because we've seen over and over and over again with the Dreyfus affair, and then the persecution of Jews during the Black Plague, and then with the persecution of Jews during Reconquista, and what happened in Russia with the pogroms, that basically the Jews cannot protect themselves. Well, that also is going to lead to the idea of Israel, which is going to, after World War I, is moving closer and closer because the creation of Palestine by the British, which been 1946-47, is when you're going to see the creation of Israel because of the Holocaust. Well, that's also going to create an issue in that when you put 4 million Jews into Palestine, you're going to push out 4 million Palestinians, and that causes a whole nother situation that we're going to talk about in a later lecture. And that's Herzl there. We're also going to see a pushback against feminism, even though we have women that, because of this is the contextualization, because of World War I, women go to the factories, which gives them more economic power. And it's not the lower classes, it's the upper middle class women, and the middle class women, the good God-fearing moms, go. That's going to cause a pushback when women start seeing, especially earlier, when middle class women and their little, what we called, remember, the cult of domesticity, these middle class women are going out and trying to find work because they're kind of bored and they need something to do, or they start pushing for the right to vote because they need something to do and they feel like they need to have part of this society. Well, that's going to cause a pushback by these individuals. And then, of course, we talked about the Contagious Disease Act, which they basically can inspect any woman they want. But then in Germany, you're seeing the exact opposite. Even though these places, you're going to see regulations on prostitution, and it's always blamed on the women for venereal diseases and all that. But you are going to see this Mother's Protection down here in the Protection League that's going to push for, and you're going to see reforms that help, women that have children out of wedlock and childcare. So, and we talked about this. This is the biggest one. The biggest thing that's going to help feminism movement is World War I. But a lot of women, like in Russia, women did make steps forwards. They were allowed more education. They're allowed to attend college. They're allowed to participate in the government. They're given the right to vote. However, they were still expected to go home and make food and take care of the children. So So that's Virginia Woolf. Other philosophies that we're going to talk about, a lot of this rejected the idea of faith and basically puts forward the idea that we control, because we put our hands in all these other religions and all these philosophies before, and now people are looking for that I can control my own destiny. After World War I, the system failed me. Religion failed me. The government failed me. The economics failed me. I want to control my own path. And there's a lot more rational human ideas. Then we already saw Nietzsche with the Uberman. Don't think we need to worry about Bergson for this one. Syndicism, the idea believes socialism would come to power through great violent strikes. We see that with the Bolsheviks. And then, of course, we talked about Freud already. And then Freudian ideas, and we talked about the strong human psyche. After World War I, his interpretation, obviously, it's going to fit a lot onto middle-class women, which, again, okay. There's also this push of the anti-utopians. Remember, everything was kind of positive before this, but now there's going to be this push back against it, and a lot of these are the modernists. Spengler with the decline of Western society, T.S. Eliot with Wasteland, Kafka, which you read, part of The Trial. And it basically shows that idea of that helplessness. That my favorite one is Metamorphosis. The guy basically wakes up as a bug. And yet his concern is, so this man overnight turns into a giant human cockroach, but yet his only concern is not that he's a human cockroach, but that how is he going to go to work? And he's going to lose his job because he's a giant cockroach and can't go to work. Not that he's concerned he's a giant cockroach. He's concerned that he can't go to work. Hopefully you can all relate to this. And of course, All Quiet on the Western Front, which is a classic with this. And a lot of these writers, the reason why you're going to see a lot of this is that existentialism we're talking about, this idea that life is absurd, that viewed the world as the individual has to find his own meaning in it, is that this is what we call the lost generation, that these individuals trusted the system and the system failed them. And so now they have to go out and find their own path, that they have to go out and seek their own concepts, and they're going to tear down the old systems because they failed them. And so this lost generation who saw what happened in World War I and then later in World War II, that felt the pain and the neglect and the rejection, they're going to be atheistic because the church let them down. They tend to be anti-republic or anti-social systems because those all failed them. And so that's what we're talking about, this lost generation that has just, they're full of pain and anger and angst because they were told, this is, if I do what I'm supposed to do, the system will work and it will continue. And then that failed. And so that's the problem for these people. And this, your question, Orwell, 1984 with Big Brother, T.S. Eliot again, Kierkegaard. Highly recommend Kierkegaard. This is that idea that they're going to have. It's this idea that they're going to mix in a little bit of that idea that there's a power over you that leads this. We talked about this already. We talked about Heisenberg. That was already in. Bauhaus is, for those who are going to architecture, Bauhaus, very straight, elegant lines. You're going to see this looks like a lot of IKEA furniture. All right. It's very popular still in Germany and in Central Europe. My wife's exchange sister is actually, her house is designed in a Bauhaus design. It's very like St. Louis, the skyscraper concept you see in the 19th century in America. You're going to see some, not as much of that in Europe, but there are going to be some. But Bauhaus, like I said, is this very straight, narrow, clean lines, lots of glass, open furniture. You'll see this still in, like I said, IKEA. It's still there. Painting. All right. So we're gonna try to get this done real quick. But here's what we got. We've seen all of these. Okay, Van Gogh. This is all the Impressionists, right? Okay. Cubism
It's where it's geometric and has these zigzaggy lines. What you're doing is you're going deeper into the artist's mind. As you go into cubists, you're going into the artist's mind. And the best example, obviously, is Pablo Picasso. It's how the artist perceives what he sees. It's no longer like, you can still tell what the original object was with Van Gogh, right? This is the artist interpretation of that room or that individual through their psyche, how they see it. Okay. And this one's in Chicago. I believe this one's in Chicago also. Very much Cubist. This is his blue period. This is Guernica, which we will see again when we talk about World War II in our couple of World War II lectures we're going to do. Okay. Dadaism is literally that idea that we say coming out of the art styles that are this lost generation. These are artists that say, screw the rules. Dada literally means nothing. It is like a child saying da 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 da. You go, like, he's saying daddy. No, he's not. He's saying dog. Who knows? He doesn't care. He's a kid. He's going da 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 da. It's your little brother or sister spinning around in a circle saying just gibberish. It doesn't follow any rules. Typically, Dada, though, does have some type of meaning in it. Sometimes the meaning is there's no meaning. Sometimes, I know that sounds weird, but sometimes it also, you're going to see a lot of it is this outrage towards the political economic systems. Okay. You're going to see that with a lot of the German Dada painters. All right. And they're going to be very angsty and angry about what happened during World War I, but they don't follow any rules. There's no more of this lines and paint colors and all that. It is just art for art. And like I said, it attacked all the standards, all the behaviors. So this is a good example. This is 1926. This is German Dada art. And you notice he's criticizing the social concepts. Like here you have the politicians, right? He's got a teacup on his head. Here's one of the business people that literally got crap for brains right there. You got the priest that's praising the war and destruction, and of course here's the fascist, and there's nothing. Their head is empty. There's nothing there. They just want to go to war. He's criticizing the social structure of what's happening in the post-war World War I world, and it doesn't follow any of the rules, but it throws blame and shade on these political systems. There's another example of Dada. It kind of questions the economics of the time period in England and Germany. This is my favorite one. They have these at the Tate, which is the Modern Art Museum in London. It is just a urinal, and it's just a metaphor for what art is art. Marcel Duchamp bought these urinals. He signed them and dated and numbered them and dated them, and then that was art. That's it. It's a urinal. That's it. That's a nudes descending a staircase. I don't see it for myself, but it's there. So surrealism is where you're going literally into the artist's mind. There's no rhyme or reason. It is literally the psyche of the artist. And this is one of the best examples of Salvador Dali. Dali, if you think you've got a Dali, it's probably not worth much, because Dali had a habit. He's also one of the pop artists of the modern time. He would walk through town. I think he had an aardvark, if I remember right. He would walk through New York with his aardvark, of all things. And then he would go to restaurants and he would literally sign and draw a picture and say, this should cover the check. And so he did that so many times that those are worthless. But then there are pieces where Dali did Alice in Wonderland that's illustrated by Dali, and it's worth millions. Or he did a line of postage stamps that never released by the federal government here in America that were Dali surrealism. They're worth some money, the proofs are, but it's literally inside his mind. It's how he perceives it. So this is some examples of Dali's work. So this is inside the artist's mind. So it's like Freud. If Freud was a painter, this is it. Music,
Stravinsky obviously writes a spring. Schoenberg, you're going to see that is examples of the classical stage. But you're also going to see an idea where you're going to have new music or American music, especially in the form of jazz and the blues in the 1920s, are going to be infiltrating in. So right now, American culture is actually pushing its way in. And one of the best examples of this would be films. Charlie Chaplin was very, very popular in Europe. And you're going to see the ideas of movies then are going to take. Hitler's favorite movie was King Kong, the 1930s King Kong, well, late 20s, early 30s. And so movies obviously are a way. You're going to see it also as a way to manipulate the masses. Sergei Eisenstein, he's going to be a propagandist for the Russians. They're going to do Ivan the Terrible is going to be made under Stalin's orders to create this kind of a Russian feel and like a piece of Russian propaganda. Probably the best one is Leni Riefenstahl, who was not the first person picked, but was picked second because the original person fled the country. She did Triumph of the Will, which is a huge propaganda piece for the Nazis. It paints this idea of the Nuremberg rally and this almost godlike nationalistic figure Hitler's going to become. And so movies, not only is it a cultural exchange between the United States and Europe, and it also is a way of getting to the masses and creating this shared cultural political concept, but it also then is something that can be manipulated by individuals like Stalin in Russia and, of course, Hitler in Germany. So, yeah, there you go. And then radio, now you can actually reach in. Same thing in American history is that radio becomes one of those things that you can reach into the American home. Hitler's going to make sure that everybody's got a radio. He doesn't want anyone far from his voice. The longest running radio network in the world is the BBC. And eventually even the Queen is going to use the radio, and the King is going to use the radio to reach out to the people. And you're going to see the major impact by the 1920s of radio. And again, like I said, jazz and other things. But you are going to see this cultural exchange. Like I said, jazz, movies, things like that are going to be this push-pull effect between the United States and Europe. So American culture starts showing up in a larger amount. So this one's a little long. Sorry, folks. But hopefully you understand how when those social structures, political structures, you've got the lost generation that are just feel like everybody's let them down, and they come back and there's no jobs and they're angry, and you've got people with missing arms and legs, and then the things like religion and politics and economics and social structures, all those had let you down. They'd all failed, and that creates this age of anxiety, which fed with this whole idea of this lost generation that feels like everything is coming apart. And then everything literally comes apart. The economy collapses further with the Great Depression. You have a weak government in Germany. You have inept leaders in England and France, which lets this thing spiral out of control. And then that's going to usher in people like Hitler and Mussolini and Western Europe, and Stalin's going to manipulate this for power in Russia. And so there's a whole lot, although Russia is kind of more stable during this time after the revolution finishes compared to the rest of Europe. So, well, stable is kind of a weird kind of way to look at it, but we'll talk about that. All right, folks, sorry this one's so long. Make sure you answer the questions that are going to be with this, and hopefully this helps you understand how we got ourselves socially to World War II. So, all right, take care, folks. Good night.